Hi. There we go. Hi. How you doing? I'm so excited to see you guys here. Welcome to the Female Voices of Film Twitter panel. My name's Alicia Malone, and I am a Fandango correspondent. I'm the creator, hey guys, of the weekly show Indie Movie Guide. I'm also a host on Turner Classic Movies, and also a host on Filmstruck, which is a partnership between TCM and the Criterion Collection. I'm also an author. Plug in my book of a book called Backwards and in Heels, which is conveniently available to buy at the bookstore. So I've been talking about women in film for a very long time, and one of the ways I do that is online, on social media. And it remains a scary place to be online if you are a woman. Women are constantly judged on their looks, they are tested for their knowledge. They are called fake geek girls, they are bullied and trolled and sometimes even stalked. But on the other hand, social media can be a great place for to have a community between women, to elevate each other's voices, to find new women and to support each other. So we're going to dig into all that and so much more, and I'm so excited to have with me a brilliant panel of ladies. Let's start with Jen Yamato. She is at Jen Yamato. She is a writer and critic for the LA Times. Hi, Jen. Then we have at the Amy Nicholson. Amy is a freelance writer and critic for Variety, The Guardian, Uprocks, so much more. At that Jacqueline is Jacqueline Coley. She is a host on Rotten Tomatoes, and she also is a writer for Black Girl Nerds. And finally we have Monica Castillo at M. Casti Movies, who is a freelance writer. She has worked for The Washington Post, The New York Times, RogerEbert.com, a great group of established ladies. So first off, we'll start with the good before we get into the nitty-gritty. And I want this to be a free-flowing conversation, so I might, put questions to each of you every once in a while, but feel free to jump in whenever you like. So Jacqueline, I'm going to start with you because you're a great example of a woman who has crafted her own career, has made a space for herself online, and Twitter was one of the first places I met you. So can you tell me how you use Twitter to help create your own career?
Wow, I don't know there was a science to it. I just liked Twitter because it felt like shouting into a room full of strangers and running away, personally. Whereas on Facebook, I know these people, so I definitely didn't show my actual and true self. There's this great image of, it's Cate Blanchett from Lord of the Rings, and it's Cate Blanchett from Thor. It's like me on Facebook, me on Twitter. And so I was just doing that, but what I found in it is I discovered first Black Girl Nerds, the account for Black Girl Nerds, and I found this amazing community of Black women who were just as nerdy as I was, who felt just as awkward and maybe out of place in the places that they grew up, where it was not assumed that you were into comic books and musical theater, but also into period British dramas. But I found them. There's a girl, literally Kendall, she's like my doppelganger in the things that we like The Bachelor, and then equally like Jane Austen novels. It's just a thing. And that was it. And once I found those women, I was like, well, if there's more of us, let's do more. And then I met lovely ladies like everyone on here. I knew your handles before I met you in person, obviously, and it's just amazing. I love the community of Twitter, and I found that people like you. They don't care that I'm random and awkward, and they forgive the typos. So it's good.
Now, you have such a great voice on Twitter, and Monica, you're also someone that I love to follow, someone who speaks up for representation, and I really admire how you use your voice on social media. So can you tell us how you use Twitter and how you hope your voice adds to the conversation?
Well, thank you. Some might say I tweet too much, and then it's just now kind of become a habit. I kind of just want to share the things that interest me, and again, that sort of difference between Facebook and Twitter. Twitter, I can find other people who are really interested in film, even though I may not personally know them. They might be in another city that I've never been to, another part of the world that I've never seen, and then we get to talk about that movie. We get to share each other's work, and it does kind of create community, and which is why we now what is now known as film Twitter. We know that we can have our opinions, you know, get a response, and maybe even talk about it if we want to. Maybe we don't. That's also an option there. But yeah, it kind of just started as a thing, a place where I wanted to share things and be able to talk to people about things.
I also love following Amy on Twitter because you do a variety of stuff, both your work, and I love to read all your work on all the different outlets, but also just observations from your Uber ride, conversation with your Uber driver. I love that mix of things. So as a freelance film critic now, are you finding Twitter a good place for employment?
Oh gosh, I don't know about, I mean, I guess. I don't know, like once, I guess Twitter was a good place to say. I was at MTV News that collapsed, and there was a huge outpouring on Twitter when MTV News, everybody in my class that got hired all got let go at the same time with a pivot to video. That is now pivoting back, I don't know. Everybody's just in circles, pivoting around. But it was a good place for everybody to send Twitter hugs and gifts. I know I got a couple from Jen Yamato for sure.
I have to give you real IRL hugs.
But yeah, I suppose Twitter is like, it actually has been nice to like have people reach out all the time because they're aware of you, they're aware of your work. To me, one of my favorite things actually about Twitter as a film critic, because I've been a film critic since I feel like I was a baby now. It's very weird to look back at things that you know you 15 years ago when you were very, 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 very young and probably should have like been nicer to Nicolas Cage. But like in all that time, one of the things that's been really great is like getting tweets from people all over the world. I'm from the Midwest originally. I'm from San Antonio first, and then Oklahoma, and getting tweets from like film lovers in all of these states, being like, I just watched that, I just streamed that, and having this conversation with people that aren't in my town. You know, I talk to all these lovely film ladies all the time, especially Jen in person, all the time. We argue about movies like The Greatest Showman, but I get to do that.
Do not bring up that thing.
Moving on.
This is McDonald's of musicals. Sorry.
Thank you! McDonald's is very popular. I don't know why.
And bad for you. And bad for you.
Well, Jen, you know, online, and especially with something that is often considered male-dominated, which is the area of film, it's not necessarily going to be a space for all women. You have to create your own space. So how have you chosen to do that with social media? Because you're another one who is not afraid to tackle any topic despite any ire you might get from the people who are out there.
Oh yeah, it's been really interesting to watch so-called film Twitter, like the birth of it and then the evolution of it, because my career writing about film started at Rotten Tomatoes, where Jacqueline is now. Yeah. But I was an editor back then, and just going to film festivals and writing on the internet. And so writing on the internet led to me realizing that my opinion is just as valid as all these older white men who have been in the game for so long. And that new perspectives actually make the conversation much more interesting. And so for me, being a part of film Twitter, by the way, I do not gladly say that I'm part of film Twitter.
Oh, girl, you're like queen.
Like,
don't
oh no!
I mean, I hate to
a
say
stranger like ats me and like and suggests that I'm a part of film Twitter. I'm like, how dare you? How dare you say that? But it is a thing. Like panels like this really underscore the good side of film Twitter, the power that it has to bring people like us together. Like we all met, a lot of us met on Twitter and by having conversations and by seeing each other's work online. So it has been a really powerful force to create a community out of. But in terms of feeling empowered to express my opinion, I think, like Jacqueline says, it began for me as a, hey, I can say like what I want to say here and maybe have some interesting conversations, maybe pretend I didn't hear somebody like respond, maybe hit that mute button, which I have come to really love. So it's been a really interesting thing because to me, I feel like my career has paralleled with the birth of this thing, this online community, and now it lives on film Twitter, so it's very much a part of how I have come to engage in these conversations.
Well, I wanted to read you guys a tweet that I came across just yesterday, written by a male critic who will remain nameless.
Oh, good.
But I wanted to get your response on this.
Oh, I think I know.
It says, Film criticism has reached a strange point where it's now commonplace to review the message instead of the movie. It's a trend that has slowly been building with the competition from think pieces, but it's slightly worrisome, especially when it comes from smart critics. And this was also retweeted with a times 100 by another male critic who said that he doesn't leave the cinema thinking about isms. How do you respond to that?
I already responded on Twitter if anybody is
Lord
interested in
help
finding
him.
out what that conversation was like.
Oh, you're gonna leave us hanging or get our
Yeah,
phones
what
to
did you
look it
say
up?
on Twitter, Jen?
Oh, I don't remember. It's very kind. Alicia's like the kindest person on film Twitter, so you're really the mayoress of film Twitter, because you're too kind to name names. I will name names. Greg Elwood, who is a very look, he's very respected. Like, I respect his opinions a lot, and he tweeted that initial tweet, which coming from him does make me, want to consider that perspective. Jeff Snyder, another person who's long been in this community, especially this online film community, is the person who responded. And to that, I have to say, well, it's great that like certain communities of people, white men, have never really had to think about identity and representation. And I'm very grateful that now, in this time that we are in, that those conversations are much more important and being had every single day. So they can stay out of those conversations. It's fine, but we will continue to have them.
And I just love how they talk about isms, but like, I'll tell you something. I'm here from Austin. I lived here for 15 years. And when they shoot movies in Austin, and I notice things about them that are unauthentic to living in Austin and being in Austin, it bothers me because I identify as someone that lived here and loved here. And I think if you would put that to those same critics in that way, they would understand why I cannot delete the fact that I'm a black woman watching this movie, and how you treat characters I see on the screen is going to, and without question, be something that I'm going to examine and think about. Because again, there's so few of us up on the screen anyway. There's so few of us that have any sort of lead or narrative that is our own, that is not also attached to pain. So yes, of course I'm going to analyze it, and it is going to be a part of it. I love your privilege to be able to delete parts of yourself from the things you do. But I wake up every day a black woman, and I watch movies that way. And that's the way it's going to be. So yeah, I can't delete my blackness from it. Sorry, bruh.
No, it happened to me earlier on in my career. I had a critic that I respected greatly come and tell me that I was letting my feminism get in the way of my criticism. And I had no idea what that meant. Like, oh, am I not supposed to write about this? Am I doing this wrong? I got really insecure about my writing. And it wasn't until Manola Dargis, the critic at the New York Times, wrote this big sort of rebuttal on blue is the warmest color that I realized, like, oh no, there is a place for us. We may have to fight for it, but there are certainly ways that we can talk about both things that interest us.
And I know this has come up recently with A Wrinkle in Time, which is a movie directed by Ava DuVernay, who, of course, is a woman, and people are so focused on it, and then some people don't like it, some people do, and then there's a so-called backlash against people that did like it, saying that maybe they just like it because it's directed by Ava DuVernay.
Yeah, let's talk about this. We don't give out Ava coupons. Like, because, I mean, on the ride over here, I actually spoke to Jen about this. I've had more people question me about my opinion on A Wrinkle in Time than any other movie. Like, nobody.
You know how many people have come up to me asking me what I thought of Wrinkle in Time?
Oh.
None people.
Exactly, though. Exactly. And I love that they don't think, but they do. Ava was a publicist in the African-American community for a long time before she became a director, and she is very deep within it, and there is a definitely familial aspect of the black creative community, both the folks that write about it and the folks that produce it. It does not mean that I'm not going to call out a film if I don't like it. Like, I'm not scared to do that. It's almost like they think that we don't have the conviction of our opinions and that I'm so scared. Maybe that's how you exist, but I don't.
Yeah, well, that leads me to another tweet I want to read, this time from a great female film critic, April Wolfe, who I know we all love and adore.
Aww.
And she wrote this, yeah, April. She wrote this, she said, "Weird that as a woman reviewing films, my reviews that stand outside the norm are labelled either as a backlash or a defence. At what point can I just write a review and someone takes it at face value as an analysis of a movie?" Amy, do you feel the same way sometimes?
That's tricky because I feel like that conversation happens maybe around me, but I've always tried my best to keep the biggest blinkers up because I believe very strongly in being one of those people who knows I'm weak enough I can't read comments. And if anybody says anything mean to me, I'm a first-time muter because I think all of us maybe have that sense that, like, if you let a voice into your head when you're writing the next review, it affects how you write the next review. Like you're trying to prove something to this one random person you don't know. So keeping blinders up has actually been like the hardest part sometimes of being on the web is making sure that people who don't deserve to have a little corner in the back of my brain don't get to bury themselves in there. Because you do always remember the things that people say that are bad. So I actually had somebody post a couple comments that were under my Wrinkle in Time review on my Facebook, a friend of mine, thinking like, isn't this funny? And I was like, stop it, don't, please. Like, I don't go in there for a reason. But I think kind of what we're talking about right now speaks to the idea that social media on the web, I think, has turned film criticism into like a common kind of, it's almost like watching a football game now with everybody. Like there's points and there's scores and there's this idea of like if somebody's the first rotten on a film, you know, then that gets like a bunch of like tweets about it and it becomes like a thing. Like everybody's invested in numbers and stats, almost like we're like judging how many touchdowns like a film got. And that's changing the conversation in a way that is really complicated and that I haven't quite figured out how the best way is to handle it here either. You know, because it's harder for any critic, I think, to have any clear opinion of their own that's not judged by somebody.
Yeah, Jen, how do you make it so any comments don't affect your work? How do you manage to stay strong in that respect?
Oh, well, I think there are a lot of ways to deal with being a film critic in the age of the internet. It can be really scary and really annoying, and really loud sometimes. And sometimes, like Amy says, you want to just like shield yourself from the feedback, because a lot of it is bullshit. A lot of the noise, especially on Twitter, if we're talking about film Twitter and comments you get from randos who at you with their opinions, and then you click on their avatars and they're like eggs. You just learn to, I think you have to learn to either not care or not engage, because film critics are sensitive. We are interpreting art through our own human experience, that we're not robots, and we shouldn't be robots. We should, to tie this back to those tweets you were reading, it is a very subjective human endeavor to write criticism. And so I think that opens you up to a lot, and at a certain point, because the internet then invites in the entire world to your brain, you have to figure out how you need to deal with that. So for me, I don't read all the comments. I certainly don't take all comments seriously. Occasionally when they point out really good things, then it's a really great way to engage in a conversation around a film that I really love. But if we're talking about like Twitter, I just kind of zone it out.
Sometimes the negative comments can turn especially nasty. Monica, how do you deal with bullying and trolling beyond the mute and block buttons? Is there anything you can do?
I have to really, give props to the mute and block button, because they do allow me to continue using the platform. Some of the tweets I've reported have ended up with that account being suspended because they are so gross or so mean. My biggest thing is obviously leaning on my friends, talking to people about it. I think sometimes we get a little bit either protective, like we don't want to bring this up to our friends, or maybe, our friends will kind of dismiss it as, well, it's only the internet. But unfortunately, we work on the internet, so that is invading, our space. and depending on, what it is, you might have to, potentially seek some help. I had the experience of a male film critic sort of checking me, again, sort of checking the knowledge over Suicide Squad, of all the movies. I had a very negative opinion on the Latino character, and I said as much, didn't think twice. And then all of a sudden, he started a fight with me and was trying to tell me how to feel about this character because, oh, it's a villain. This is still a stereotype, and it's a very nasty one at that. But then after he started picking on me, then a lot of his followers started picking up me, and like the more and more action that tweet got, it just kind of spiraled out of control, and I couldn't even open my Twitter app because there were so many people either harassing me or telling me to get back in the kitchen or whatever other nastiness was happening. There are foul words I won't use. But yeah, it was almost 2 days before I could get back on Twitter, and that was kind of jarring because I didn't even realize, like, even the people that I lean on for support, so many of them I reach them through Twitter. So when they chased me off, the app with whatever nasty tweets, it also meant that I couldn't reach out to friends in the same way.
So what kept you going? Why
Work.
you do still remain? Yeah, work.
Yeah, I put my mind on the work. I kind of just sped past it. It was really nice. I was working at the New York Times at that moment, and we had like a morning check-in where we all say like, oh, what did we watch last night? And I said Suicide Squad, and I said something on Twitter, and now I'm being harassed on it, and I can't access my account, or I was having problems with it. And my editor actually later on sent me an email and said, are you okay? Do you need to take the day off? And I said no because I wanted to keep focus and away from social media, and just that was the way that I was coping with it. But that's actually another way to do it too, to just step away from the computer, put distance between you and the hate, and just let it boil over, because someone will be mad about something else in about 10 minutes. So just let it pass.
And wine helps. It really does.
Wine is great.
Wine is
I have also
Lots of
found that to
wine.
be true.
Rosé will make a day better.
Yeah, because if I am, to be honest, sometimes it gets so tiring when you're constantly tested on what you know, you're constantly judged, or just to hear about yourself all the time on Twitter can get really rough.
Well, and you've dealt with it on YouTube.
Yes, on YouTube I've had it. That's probably the worst place. I've been on many channels that have been very male-dominated, both on screen and then the people watching. And the first time I ever mentioned something about supporting women, the amount of hate that I got really took me by surprise, and I got quite depressed about it, and I thought, I'm not strong enough for this. I can't do this. I should just hide under my duvet and give it all up. But then I also have a real stubborn streak. So after a night of sort of letting myself wallow, or 2 nights or so, then I was like, you know what? I'm going to talk about even more. I'm just going to make even more noise, and because they obviously need to hear it. So I started doing more research into women in film and talking about statistics which are harder to debate, but of course people find a way, and get called all sorts of things. But the funniest one I thought was SJW, which is Social Justice Warrior, which is meant to be disparaging, but I thought it sounds really cool. I was like, I want to be a warrior for social justice. That sounds awesome. So I'm going to take that and use that. But I still now, I mean, even just 2 days ago, there was a guy who wanted to tell me all about feminism and that I was doing it wrong. And because there's such ignorance about what he was saying to me, I was just like, is this even worth it? Like, can I mean, not to engage with him, but in general, like, are things changing? Is it going to happen? Should I keep going? And I always feel like I just want to quit and walk away. So, Jacqueline, what keeps you going and keeps you strong through those moments and keeps you online? Because I kind of don't want to quit, because then what is it saying?
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's there. And especially the longer you are on this and the larger my platform gets, the more I see it and the more I'm just like, and I definitely see what you're doing. Like, Alicia's on this like side of the lake where I know she might just jump in, and I'm looking at her like, that water looks really good. That whole like delete all the social media and just jump in.
I tell Jacqueline all the time, like, what if I just delete it all? Like with this wild look in my eyes.
Don't do it.
What would happen?
Yeah, she's on the precipice, and I'm just like,
But I keep
it
going.
looks pretty, but where I'm standing, still in the bunker, still in the down and dirty, there are some beautiful things. And one of the beautiful things are things like what Black Panther means to me. That hashtag was started by Black Girl Nerds, by our social media curator, because her son was saying how amazing it was. And like, if you just need a happy moment in your day, go get on that hashtag and just cry, because you will, because you will hear this outpouring of children and adults and grandparents. I had people in my family who have not been to movies in forever, and they were like, we are showing up and showing out for Black Panther. And it was this amazing moment where it was just everything, you know? And that is what keeps me on. And the memes. The memes are pretty dope. Memes and the gifts are pretty dope. But that's what keeps me on, stuff like that. And it is a long, hard road of awful for those moments of sunshine. But I remember being online that morning when we knew the hashtag was gonna come out and we all knew we were gonna do our thing. And I just watched it grow into this beautiful thing. And I would have missed it. And it would have made me sad, because that kind of joy keeps me going through the other side, even though there's a lot more of the other side. But yeah, I enjoy that.
Something I also struggle with is how much to share and how much not to share.
Yeah.
Because I like to have my private life to myself. So a lot of times I don't share what I'm actually doing. I'm also very mindful as well of Instagramming after I leave a place, just in case, because you never know, right? And I don't give too many details about my personal life or where I live or anything like that. But then I kind of look at my Twitter and I think, well, I'm only talking about the work stuff that I'm doing that I want to promote and share. And then is that just creating a highlights reel that someone else is going to look at and feel like my life is perfect and shiny and everything's wonderful, when maybe it's not? So Jen, how do you find the balance between being authentic and also keeping your private life to yourself?
Well, I had to learn to swear less on Twitter, which is probably the hardest. And I do share a lot of my real life. I don't protect myself probably as much as I should. I tweet quite often about karaoke. I don't know if you guys heard, but I like karaoke.
She's a queen of karaoke.
If anybody's got some karaoke action going on, you just hit me up, please. But yeah, I think over the last 5 years or so, I became much more aware of that, as you're saying. And it's, I think you have to protect yourself, especially if you're a woman in this space. You have to learn to turn off geotagging. And that's just a sad reality. It's not something I want. I want to be able to be like loud and authentic and unfiltered all the time. But the reality is Twitter amplifies great stuff, and it also amplifies really scary, gross stuff. And you just have to come to terms with that as a reality of this space that we are choosing to engage in. So I think you do have to be smart about what you let out and what you let in all regards. But certainly I'm going to start thinking about post-Instagramming now. That's a great idea.
Yeah, that's a good tip. Also, there is a website out there for any woman online or man online where you don't want your personal information out there, called Delete Me. And I very much recommend that, because you'll be surprised at how many places online have your address published publicly that anyone can find.
I bet you get a lot of weirdos, huh?
Well, I'm pretty lucky now. I feel like everyone knows what I'm about, and they know when they come to my Twitter, I'm going to be talking about women in film. So I don't really get that many angry people anymore. The thing that I sometimes get is just people thinking that they know more about me than they actually do. I'll get emails from people saying, I know you, Alicia. And I'm like, no, you know what I put out there. But there's a whole real me that I don't share with the world, and on purpose, because I don't want to be so public and share it with everyone. So, Amy, do you have any tips for people protecting themselves online, or do you think about that and how much to share?
Yeah, I would say I've never been that good at public vulnerability. You know, we have friends on Twitter who are very much like, I'm sad today, or tell me I'm pretty. And I'm like, there's a part of me that would sooner die. So I was glad that I was born with that emotional chip, I suppose. But yeah, I like that balance that you were talking about. I don't want my Twitter to be only just me being like, read this thing that I've done, because I feel like, I think the strongest thing about being a critic is being a full three-dimensional person, because as you guys are saying, it's putting your brain out there, it's being really personal. And I've got my own weirdness and bias, and I love, breakfast tacos too much. I'm always like, I don't know, I'm way too obsessed with that. And poodles, you have these like personal likes and dislikes. I should be a lot more open about the fact that it's really hard for me to like a film with Natalie Portman, It is just the more honest I feel like I am about that, I think that's better, because if you're a Natalie Portman lover, you should probably know that this is a tough spot for you. Or if you love Rooney Mara, I'm probably not your critic, It's hard, it's hard, and I'm trying, and I'm aware of it. But yeah, like, I've been really lucky in that everybody who's ever come up to me has been super nice. Like, and it's always a little surprising, but it's really welcoming, because I think that, I think of film sometimes as like, I don't know, like, this is a weird analogy, but like as an empathy vitamin, I guess. That's what I've been thinking about film a lot in the last year and a half, is like, here's a film with a story that I think is really beautiful, and it's not a story even that maybe that I would have thought of. It's not like a life I've ever lived, but I watched that and I feel like I got a little dose of empathy about what this life is like. And then as a critic, if I can point out that film, especially if it's a littler film, and say, oh, pay attention to this, that's a lot of what's been keeping me going, like, in, the last year and a half, is like thinking these are the ways to get people to care about each other. And that's a lot of where film criticism has been going for me.
Yeah, and I have to say that the thing that keeps me back on Twitter is being able to find a community of like-minded people. When I was in high school and I loved classic movies, I've told this story before, but I tried to start a classic film club and no one came to any of my screenings. So now I feel like I have a whole community that I can talk about classic film with, and they share the love for classic film, and it makes me feel like there are people out there, my tribe. I also want to say, with Mr. Leonard Moulton sitting right there, but for Christmas every year, the only thing I would ask Santa for was for Leonard Moulton's movie guide. And I loved reading his movie guide and marking down the films to see and making sure I went through that. And now I can share that with many people, and with Leonard and Jessie themselves on Twitter, which is such a great way to talk and communicate, keep up with people. So recently, of course, we saw women stepping up and taking back their power and sharing their stories through the hashtag #MeToo movement. And I know for me it was completely overwhelming, and it was empowering as well, but it was moments when I just had to switch off and not read all the volume of stories. I'm glad that the conversation is out there though. So Monica, what was that whole experience like for you? Did you start reading all those stories? Did you share your own?
Oh my goodness, that was so emotional. And for us, even before Harvey Weinstein's story broke out, there was also issues with Devin Faraci, and there was the Alamo Drafthouse, and Cinefamily as well. There were all these little mini scandals that, on one side, people who didn't know about it were kind of reevaluating how they saw these people or how they saw these spaces, and thinking like, wait, why didn't I ever seen this? Why didn't I ever hear about this? And other people were kind of just nodding their head and going, well, yeah, about time you caught up. And that was really sad. That happened about a year-ish ago when the first allegations against Faraci came out. And there were a lot of people who started telling their stories. And that was very emotional for me, because I don't feel like I can tell all of my stories. Might be here for a while. But there were other women. I said something like general on Twitter, just like, okay, when someone says something like this, believe them, because it's just so heavy and so hard to carry that all by yourself, keeping it alone and in the dark. And there were women who were reaching out to me and asking for who else should I be avoiding, who else should we know about. And then there were guys reaching out to me asking, how many other are there? They just didn't know. They just never seen that kind of behavior or never saw things like it as predatory. And that was also very eye-opening. And I'm glad that those conversations are happening, and they're happening within our community. And I think they need to continue to happen. We're not done talking about it.
No, definitely not. And also recently we've had the Time's Up as well as another movement. And for the first time we see this group of really powerful women who have a strong presence in Hollywood coming together to try to change things, not only for the Hollywood industry, but for all industries as well. Jacqueline, do you remain optimistic that things can change in Hollywood and things might get better even on Twitter?
Yeah, Alicia knows this answer already, because I love so many things about Time's Up and Me Too, and I felt all of that groundswell. But I also know that this is Hollywood and we know how to put on a show. And I came from a tech job, was what I used to do, and it's all about actionable things. It's all about things getting done. And I know that everybody's working really hard to get a lot of things done with Time's Up and Me Too, but I don't think people realize that it's the Rock of Gibraltar and we have to cut away so many things that we're not talking about. Because it's great that we're talking about things like inclusion writers, and it's great that we're talking about gender parity, but are we talking about wage parity? Are we talking about the differences between entertainment media when we talk about entertainment spaces for people of color versus traditional publications, and the level of access and assumptions? Is it different when we talk about how the way people market films and talk about films? Is it different for the fact that, yeah, if in front of the camera you have this great diverse cast, but every single person behind the camera is the same 6 dudes you've worked with and you've never opened the door to someone else? Like, the more I see things, I think about when movies get made, it's so hard to get them made, and I know that. But I hear so many stories about, well, this guy just handed off this script to this other guy who's already successful, and he never thought once to maybe try and find a new voice. Like, and they're handed these scripts, probably with money and financing attached. They're just looking for their right director, right? You know, they've probably got actors attached to it. I talked to somebody like Franklin Leonard, who runs The Blacklist, and just listening to his stories about how these Oscar-caliber movies had to go through so many things because people didn't want to listen to the fact that it had an Asian woman in the lead. So those are the things where I'm like, yes, I'm hopeful for Time's Up and Me Too, and I'm hopeful that things are going to change, but I also know that it is deeper and more ingrained in anything you can do. The way we view women in media is the reason why men think they can do these things, and the fact that we don't value them in every aspect of what we create is why it continues to happen. So I'm hopeful, but I'm also like looking at every day, like, what are we doing? What are you doing if you have a platform and you have access and you have power, and what are we doing?
Yeah, that's great. Jen, you're someone who uses her platform to speak about real issues. Is that something you recommend every person do?
Oh, I wish everybody would use their platforms to engage in meaningful conversations and elevate other voices and find other voices that need to be elevated and need to be heard, which is why I think it's the great thing about Time's Up happening right now and it feeling like it is just the beginning, right? We're only at the beginning. We're not the end. We're not even in the middle of seeing change come out of Me Too and Time's Up. But the great thing about things like Twitter is that is where I feel like a lot of the bonds are being formed through people who maybe have never met each other before. That is where community is being formed. That is where the movement really lives, I think, in terms of visibility. There are a lot of certainly things happening behind the scenes that I keep hearing about from people who are filmmakers who are involved and activists, and that's very promising. I agree. I'm hopeful, but I'm also a woman of color in a white male-dominated field, and that's never really bothered me before. It doesn't bother me now because I think now I feel much more connected to other voices and other underrepresented voices, both in media and in film and elsewhere, just like in the internet space and on Twitter. So I know that there is power and there is potential in these connections, and that's very promising to me.
I mean, I'm hopeful for sure, because I think even just about the films I would have been reviewing like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, comedies where it was just the standard that there was going to be a girl in a bikini who got either like laughed at, like slept with and thrown away, or murdered or whatever, and it was just normal standard business. Like films that made, $100 million 5-10 years ago, I don't think we'd be greenlighting them today. I think we've really changed that conversation. I think that there's stuff that was recently huge hits that wouldn't get made again. And I feel like in that tone, things are changing. You know, I'm not gonna keep my eyes, like, I'm not gonna take my eyes away from it and think like, oh, we got this, but it does feel like there are things now that just won't fly. It's like when we look at the comedies of the 80s, you know, the way that they treated homosexuality. That's not gonna, that stopped working here, you know, 5 years ago, and we're continuing to take steps forward in what is considered okay mass entertainment.
Well, and Amy's here writing reviews out of South by for Variety, making her one of very, very few female critics writing for any trade anywhere. So that's really great, and I think I'm gonna enjoy your reviews way more than some of your colleagues.
I like them, but you know, also it's nice that we're here at South by, and yesterday I was like, post up at the Paramount, and every single film in there was directed by a female director. So it's definitely, the more we talk about it, it does feel exhausting that we're always talking about it, that we always have to talk about it. But I think in the last year, I feel like I've definitely seen actionable change. Not enough to be like, we got this, but it's good.
Yeah, one thing that I get asked all the time is from young women especially of how do I get into the industry? And of course there is no one way. I wish there was like, oh, you study this course and then you go this and you do this. It's multiple ways. Each of us got into the industry in very different ways. But if I can go down the line, starting with Jen, what would be your advice for young women who want to get in the industry, and how do they maybe use social media to help brand themselves?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that the reason I have a career writing about entertainment because I was a giant nerd in my awkward phase when I was like second grade, when I had no friends and I was like had glasses and didn't do anything but like race home every day to read the TV guide cover to cover. And I would like watch HBO and Cinemax. I was just obsessed with movies and entertainment, and like sci-fi fantasy novels, and all sorts of like wonderfully dorky stuff, which I'm so glad that I had that time in my life to lean into, because eventually the world caught up to it and I was able to find opportunities where I could exercise that love. So my advice is just to love what you love, and if you want to be in this field, lean into it, lean into who you are and what interests you, and work on your writing craft. Keep learning, and I think Twitter's a good idea. It's interesting because like we are all of a generation which is different from previous generations of critics and journalists who really did keep that veil intact between the personal and the work that we do. And things like Twitter really decimate any sort of protective barrier by choice. So I think we are among the first generations that have learned to be so public in our work. And I would encourage other writers to do that too, because you can find a sense of community, you can connect to other potential editors who could hire you or at least read your work. And I think you can @ me if you really want to, and send me like your writing, because I'm always looking for interesting other perspectives to retweet or to share, and that's something that is really exciting to me to do.
I always feel like my advice is so depressing because when I look at my own story, it's like the stretch of food stamps and paying rent to live on a living room floor and writing for $25 a review for sites that died, and and spending a really long time just even trying to get on press lists. Like it was, none of it was ever easy, and it took a very, 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 very long time. And I was thinking, like, right as we were walking into this panel, Jen, I remember like us 7-8 years ago, I was working for a website that was very much in peril and run by like a crazy millionaire and who was not nice. And you were wearing a tomato, and we were hanging out like in San Diego.
Or a giant tomato at Comic-Con. It was a great day.
Yeah.
We still have that giant tomato.
When are you going to wear that?
You can shove people right on out of the way in that thing, and they won't even complain.
But
I
it's
have
been
no regrets.
very long and very slow, and I feel like it's so I knew a lot of people who started out with me who I think got discouraged, and they now do other things. It's not fun, but I think the main simple things are just like be nice and never be late on your deadlines, and always be incredibly kind to your editors, and And that's, to me, been more than anything, because I feel like writing is so much a people business. Like, even now that I'm freelance, like, it's all been people who know me or people who've heard, like, that I'm not a horrible monster and not, like, a giant diva who's going to, like, fight them over, like, I was like, please kill all my adverbs. I have so many adverbs. I'd love that. But, yeah, it's a little bit of, like, keeping your ego in check. And, yeah, but it's not fun.
Keeping at it. Yeah,
Keeping
not
at it.
quitting.
Yeah.
Jacqueline, what would you say?
I think everyone already touched on this, but I do think, like, start with the words, because I have a lot of people who see what you and I do now, and they're like, oh, I want to be a host. And I'm like, you know, that's an avenue, and there's ways to go it. I usually put it in one of three. You either failed writer, failed filmmaker, failed actor, and there's a lot more of the failed actors that become hosts, but start with the words and talk to people who have good words and read their good words all the time. I've become a better writer by reading better writers all the time, and continue to do that in all things, because I feel so long as you can have a pen and you have time, it's sort of like your Iron Man without the suit. You can always have a job, you can always do something, but it's about, like what Jen said, it's a craft and you have to keep building it. The second thing I did, which is Alicia knows, is to find the people that are doing it and then just talk to them. Maybe not about what they specifically did 1A, 2B, 3 to get there, but what they did to stay there. Because Alicia gave me advice, like literally when I was stalking her like 3 South Bys ago, being like, oh, I just want to be like you, Queen Alicia. I mean, like, I'll tell you, I was her biggest fangirl, still am.
It was really nice. I remember I walked around the corner, I just heard this, Queen Alicia. What?
But I begged her for 5 minutes, and she told me, you know your what is it? Piss poor preparation.
The 6 Ps.
Your 6 Ps.
Prior preparation prevents piss poor performance.
Yes.
So I always over prepare for you.
Yeah. And what I did is I was like, prepare. I'm up till 2 a.m. making sure my interview questions are right. And I think it serves me to this day. So talk to people who are doing it, and don't necessarily ask them how they did it, because like she said, everyone's path is different, but talk to them how they stay there, because that is more valuable than the previous ones. And yeah, just have fun with it, because in the end, this is television shows and films. Nobody's living or dying by it, at least not past the fictional premise of it. So that's it.
Monica?
Until we burn film Twitter to the ground.
Yeah.
Burn it all.
Chaos.
My biggest thing is obviously what everyone else said, really work on the writing. If you're not an interesting writer, I don't think people are going to stick with you. I think we've seen that with, we've seen like really good writers rise up from like almost out of nowhere, out of like letterbox accounts and just really long tweets because their thoughts are so interesting. We're like, no, we want to read more. And then that's how they're able to build a career. The second thing is community. I'm a really big fan of having that community, of having people that you can talk to. I come from a sociology background back in undergrad, so I was all about like groups and like how we all function together or maybe don't function together. And it's so important to have that network around, because earlier on I didn't have like an older woman critic that I could look to and say, I want her career. She just wasn't there in Boston, or no one reached out to me. And when I was in New York, when I first got there. And it wasn't, I got involved, and that's how actually I got involved with the Hispanic Journalists Association. So it's a little different, but still kind of the same. We're all working towards a goal, towards telling stories and focus on different mediums and things like that. But that was when I met executive producers for like 6 o'clock news shows. I met a news director who runs one of the stations here in Austin now. And I felt so inspired. And that was also gave me this sort of confidence to be able to lead and to form groups and things like that, because we can do this. We just have to put the effort into it, and we can create those spaces.
Absolutely. Now we have a couple of minutes for questions. There are 2 microphones if anyone would like to come up and ask a question. But one of my biggest things that I've got 2 bits of advice that I always give. The first is, forgive me for swearing, but focus on your own shit. So I focus only on my own work in terms of what can I do to get better and how can I get to the next level. I don't look at other people and say, why aren't I there? and I just try to focus on myself. The other thing is supporting women. You know, I think so often we're told to compete against each other, that there's only spot for one, and that's not true. There's spots for all of us, and, you know, if we're up for the same job, we're very different. So, you know, either you're going to get it or I'm going to get it, doesn't matter. But if we can support each other and be there for each other, amplify each other's voices, and just form a community, then I think we'll be stronger than ever. So does anyone have any questions?
I have a question, actually, while we wait for somebody to come.
Yeah,
and I have one too.
I heard there's a new book out that people might be able to.
Yes. Oh my God, you had the same question. I was like, Alicia, what made you want to write the book on women in film?
The book, Backwards and in Heels, available now.
Well, just quickly, so this is my book. I wanted to write a collection of short stories about women in film, because so often we don't get to hear the stories. We're not taught the stories about women, especially early women working in film, and by not talking about them, it erases them from history, and then it sets up that bias that, hey, that women are not welcome in Hollywood, and that's not true. So let's start down here. Question.
Great. Thank you all for a great panel this afternoon.
Love your accent.
Aussie. Taking it.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm actually writing an essay for a class I'm taking here at UT on the role of gender in film criticism, and particularly how that relates to the production cycle and how the gender imbalance feeds into the type of films that get made and what voices are amplified in the conversations that we have. So given that we've been talking about the spaces that Twitter's opened up for new voices on both the part of critics and audiences, what changes maybe have you witnessed or could see happening in the relationship between production companies and the traditional Hollywood machine, and how that might be changing with this new social media?
Well, Jacqueline, you could probably speak about from the Rotten Tomatoes side of things in terms of increasing more female film critics there, and how that helps with the score, or doesn't.
I work for Rotten Tomatoes, which is like a buzzword of awesome or not so much, depending on who you ask. But I will say the tomato meter has become a thing where it's essentially in its best form, and when we get it right, it is the temperature of the critical consensus. That's all it is. It's like the weather. And because of that, the weather needs to be accurate for everyone, so it has to reflect the audience. And for a while, there was an article a few years ago where Meryl Streep was very publicly criticized Rotten Tomatoes for the lack of gender parity. And I can tell you, over the past few years, before I worked there, and then once I became a part of it, it is literally like I feel it's tattooed on every wall, how we want to get racial and gender parity on the tomato meter. And one thing I think is great is they're being vocal about where we are. We have over 3,000 critics on the tomato meter, and currently 40% of them are women. And I can tell you there's not a single newsroom at a trade that has 40% women writing for them in film criticism. There's not even most in most places that you will find. At best, you're looking at maybe 35%. So I'm really proud of that fact. And we're going to get there with the racial parity as well. I think what you said is actually accurate. What the critical consensus says about a film and how we value films affects how they get made. It affects the amount of money that they get bought for. It affects the marketing of it. I mean, Black Panther did a ton to dispel the rumor and the myth that, films based on POC characters don't sell overseas. I mean, Chadwick Boseman and the entire cast were like Beatles when they went to South Asia. And I'm really proud and happy for that. But it takes more than just Rotten Tomatoes. Variety, The Hollywood Reporter, Deadline, most of the trades, very few women writing for them, and even less people of color. And that right there is a problem because they tell so much. And the fact that those trades can't seem to find a critic of color to put on staff is really disheartening to me. And I really hope that they get there. And if those people are out there, get their bylines further up on the website, because I read y'all pretty often and I'm still missing a few.
I would add to that, media diversity is a phrase that we should be talking about much more. It doesn't just apply to gender or race, but all sorts of diversity of all perspectives. And that is really important when you're making especially independent films or smaller films, the kinds of films that need to be championed, say, out of a film festival like the one that we're at, where if the early critical reviews out of a festival premiere don't connect to a film or reflect it or even cover it at all, then that film will likely die. So many films have a life, are picked up, are acquired, are seen because they have critical champions out of the gate. And if we only have one or two kinds of perspectives working in criticism, going to those first screenings of small films, the kinds of films that need to be discovered and truly seen, then there is this direct relationship between media criticism and film, especially independent film. So I can't wait to hear your findings. Like I think that's a great idea for...
Yeah, hit us up on Twitter when that publishes.
Yeah,
I want to see it.
Aussie, Aussie, Aussie.
And hook 'em horns.
Question down here.
Hi, my name's Angel Jafria. I'm an actress who also happens to have a disability, as you can see by my glowing arm.
Cool.
Arm.
Really cool.
Yeah. So what I wanted to talk about is I have a lot of respect for you guys as film critics, and especially you guys, what you do, because you do bring a lot of attention to the isms that people don't normally notice. And I got into a little argument on Twitter with a film critic the other day about one of the films where there's somebody that's an actor that doesn't have a disability portraying a person with a disability. And I just wanted to know what your feelings were on that, because I know that it's a big toss-up on, obviously, acting talent as well as, portrayal of a character. So
Authenticity is authenticity. There's a ton of disabled actors that are being played by non-disabled actors that could be played by disabled actors. We just won the foreign language film for Fantastic Woman. And trust me, they pitched that to a dude first. Yes. You know that they did. Yeah. And so, no, I'm all for it. I don't see why, because the fact that Billy Kwan was played by Linda Hunt and won an Academy Award, until that is deleted from the narrative, I will never listen to anyone tell me that somebody can't tell their own story. I just don't believe it.
Monica, what would you say?
Oh, no, completely agree with that.
Yeah, it was nice here at South by Southwest, A Quiet Place, which is a terrifying horror film directed by John Krasinski, who I used to believe was a nice man. Now I think he's cruel because he tortures his characters. Anyway, he hired Millie Simmons, who is a deaf actor, to play a deaf character, and it makes such a difference, that authenticity. So I think Hollywood is slow to catch up, but I'm hopeful that eventually they'll change. And we just have to keep making noise. So don't buy the tickets to the films that you don't believe have accurate representations of people. Every dollar counts, and support the ones that do.
And I'm thankful to you guys for bringing attention to that stuff within your reviews and things like that, because a lot of times the audiences don't realize it when it's happening.
Exactly. Thank you.
Can you tell us your handle so we can find you?
Yeah, it's actually really annoying. You ready for this? I did it when I was 19. It's Angel, but it's 2 A's, 2 of everything except for 4 L's.
Okay.
Yeah,
Angel with 2 A's.
4 L's.
Bionic actress is the hashtag.
Bionic actress.
Bionic
We'll look you up.
Sweet.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Question over here.
Hi, my name is Alyssa. I'm a multimedia producer for a newspaper here in town, so
Yay.
local. And I just had a question about how y'all are all, prominent, well-respected women in the trade with these, some might see as outspoken opinions or just being prominent in the movements that you're talking about. How do y'all balance, or have y'all ever have to kind of hold back, with what y'all say or represent, because y'all all are representations of the press? You know what I mean?
Jen can take this one.
The Los Angeles Times.
Good question.
Is the Los Angeles Times cool with what you're saying? How do y'all balance that?
Editorially, I've never been told not to do anything except to not swear, because we're a family publication, and to not express political views that could be misconstrued as blah blah blah, that stuff. Otherwise, I feel completely free to express my opinions. I feel very supported in my newsroom, which is led by women editors, which is great. I love the Times, for example. I've worked at so many different kinds of places. I worked for film websites. I freelanced. I worked for a trade, which is very interesting, and now newspaper. And every place has mostly let me express my opinions, because the people I've worked with, I've been lucky enough to have worked with people who see the value in that. So when it comes to expressing my opinions, and Twitter also probably has enabled me to speak freely. I very gladly will say what I think, especially when it comes to bullshit arguments on Twitter about representation. And I think that those things should be pointed out. Those things should be pointed out and engaged with by people with platforms. So I feel like it's funny, we were talking earlier about being cautious about what we do or say, and you're asking me how free I feel to express myself. I hold back a lot from arguments on film Twitter because I'm like, it's film Twitter again. Until things like the tweets that Alicia mentioned come up, and I'm like compelled to point out how ridiculous they are. And so I don't even remember what your original question was anymore. I was just going to
Well, I guess
are you allowed
with
to more
women,
than 140 characters up here? But,
yeah, well, with women like wanting to get into this industry and feeling like, I mean, we always have like things that we're scared to say, but
I think you
things
should
that
say
we want to
them.
like, we want to say what we want, but also
You
knowing
gotta
that we need
represent
to
the place.
send
Say
it
them,
to
but
our future
absolutely
employers.
say what you think and say what you feel. I think you'd be respected more for it. And just be aware that, which is something that I've learned, is that you will not be heard the way that you want to be heard by everyone all the time. That's just something I think that we have to accept. But I think there's value in engaging in that conversation and exercising your ability to.
Thank you so much. We have time for one more question. I'm so sorry, but we're going to go over here. And you can always find us at our handles to ask questions anytime.
Hi, my name is Narissa Street. I'm the founder of an organization called Girls Call the Shots, and we work with teen girls in film. And I'm asking a question for them, actually, and I got the book. We were talking about this before.
Thank you.
My question for them is, they are looking for voices. They are the pipeline, coming up. And where do I tell them to go so that they can start to develop their own critical voices? Because Twitter, they kind of find their way there sometimes. But who is helping create that? Instead of waiting they get to college, they're already starting, they're viewing films, they're already starting to have their own opinions of them, but they don't see themselves really, as you're saying, even as adults. Like, how do we begin to encourage them, and what platform can they put their voices on?
That's a good question. Monica?
Well, I would recommend Letterboxd, just as a way to start kind of compiling all the movies that they've watched, and the ability to also write in information like what they thought about the movie. Sometimes I only just put the fact that I watched it and on what day and how many stars I thought it had. Other times I want to write about it more than maybe what I had a chance to write about, or maybe I didn't have a chance to write about that film, and I can put that there. It's free and accessible to everyone. It's its own social platform, so it's also, you can connect with friends and make your own list and things like that. I found that really helpful. Yeah, because for the most part, outside of Twitter and maybe Facebook, there's not a lot of places for like really young up-and-comers. You kind of have to practice on your own before you get out into the field. And I used to do, my goodness, websites. I did in college the school magazine and would write reviews there. But even if they're in high school and there's a school newspaper, tell them to get involved, get them to start practicing writing on their own time, tell them to journal. There's other ways that they can write about the stuff that interests them that isn't just for a publication.
But I would also say, in terms of helping them find their own voice, that there's value in reading people they don't agree with, honestly, because that helps them define who they are. What's the hole in this critic's opinion? What am I seeing that they totally overlooked? I think that there's a tendency towards reading only people who agree with you, and I sometimes find that my brain works best when I read people who make me furious, and that's what I love about criticism. Is I like that there is such a range, including people I think are crazy, and I'm like, I'm going to read him because he upsets me. But that it helps. Sometimes we're defined best by opposition, and I think that's so valuable.
Thank you so much, and please join me in thanking these wonderful ladies: Monica Castillo, Jacqueline Coley, Amy Nicholson, Jem Yamato. Thank you all for coming, and you can always find us on Twitter. Until I quit. No, it's joking.